as press chair of the CPTA at the 9th edition of the International Law organized by MPT Tunisia from 25 to 26 November 2024. The theme was the best practice to prevent against torture. The colloquium is 5 continents and experts I presented the efforts of CAT to the ratification of UPCAT and to the creation of national instance against torture by African countries. I also pointed the membership and the support of our committee for the Mendes principles. On 27 January 2025, I participated in the Alliance for Torture-Free Trade meeting organized by Amnesty International with the participation of its Secretary General and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Alice Edwards. The meeting was also attended by representatives of numerous governments like Argentina, Denmark, and Mongolia. I took the opportunity to recall our committee's resolution on tools of torture, as well as the key recommendations stemming from our study on this subject. The first annual meeting of the CPTA took place on 28 January 2025. This virtual meeting enabled us served as a platform to officially welcome and present the newly appointed expert members. The meeting subsequently reviewed and adopted the annual work plan and appointed focal points for each of them. The participants ultimately agreed to engage in further consultations on the theme for the year 2025. I also participated alongside my fellow commissioners and members of the ACHPR Secretariat in the committee reviewed the execution of the budget of 2024, and while lauding the work of the Secretariat, the committee adopted some recommendations to facilitate the work of the Commission. Activity conducted as member of the Commission. I participated in my colleagues and members of the Secretariat organized in Dakar 25 November 2024. The seminar was an opportunity to review some obsolete practices. So I also took part in the 2012 in Dakar in the 37 Ordre in the ACHPR. The joint letter concerning the allegations of torture in Libya, 22 January 2025, I co-signed a letter with the peace reporter on Libya on the report on torture and poor treatment on detainees in Kilada to alert the Libyan authorities and guarantee for transparency in the detention centers. The 82nd session, the online session took place in 25 February to 11 March 2025. Promotion mission. I took part from 10 to 14 March 2025 in the promotion mission led by the commissioner. It took place in excellent condition, enabled us to visit so many health institutions. Our delegation was received by high authorities of the country and all the regulatory ministers. The rapporteur will delve amply on that. Activities conducted as country rapporteur, Republic of Sudan. The representative of the High Commission in Dradulong, Mr. Radwan Nwese, led a virtual discussion on his mission in Sudan and the human rights violations observed on the ground. We exchanged views on our respective efforts to restore civilian security and on the next steps in our investigations. Mr. Nwese also shared his experience and recommendations with us. It was agreed that further communication would be resumed as soon as possible. As regards Sudan, in preparation for the launch of the fact-finding mission in Sudan, a virtual meeting was held on January 2025. The meeting brought together members of the fact-finding mission, the chairperson of the African Commission, and the executive secretary to discuss the available courses of action and the procedural steps for conducting virtual oral hearings and institute visits. Meeting with the UNFFM. The fact was organized on 14 January 2025 between members of the UNFM and the ACHPR. The meeting provided an opportunity to engage with colleagues who had been able to conduct field visits and meet victims of the war in Sudan. We informed them of the agenda of our virtual investigation and of our ongoing efforts to organize an on-site mission. Our colleagues generously provided us with guidance and made available relevant documents to support our work. We agreed to follow up with them as our investigation progresses. Press conference on the FFM Sudan. On 20 January 2025, together with the available commissioners, I hosted a press conference to officially launch the fact-finding mission on Sudan. This virtual conference served to present the mandate, terms of reference, and timeline of the mission. It significantly boosted registration for the oral hearings, which had initially progressed slowly. It also allowed us to clarify certain ambiguities and to address concerns raised by participants, including journalists and members of the civil society. Letter of concern and press release. On 20 January 2025, a letter of concern was addressed to the high authorities of Sudan to convey the African Commission on Human Rights strong condemnation of the widespread atrocities that had recently taken place in Wadami. In this letter, the Commission urged the authorities to ensure the protection of the civilian population, to undertake a thorough investigation to establish accountability, and to take appropriate legal action against the perpetrators. Meeting with Sudanese NGOs. On 10 February 2025, I had a virtual meeting with Sudanese NGOs based in Addis Ababa. This meeting, initiated by the FIDH, provided an opportunity to brief participants on the preparations and the launch of the fact-finding mission on Sudan. The organizations in attendance shared their observations and briefed us on the latest developments on the ground. Inter-Sudanese dialogue in Addis Ababa. On 17 and 18 February, at the request of the Bureau and the Secretariat, I attended the Sudanese political dialogue held under the chairmanship of His Excellency Mr. Mohamed bin Chambas. Although the meeting did not yield any notable outcome, it provided me with the opportunity to meet their excellencies, the ambassadors of Sudan, Chad, and Egypt, to inform and raise awareness regarding the entry authorizations required for the fact-finding mission on Sudan to access their respective countries. The first outcome of this engagement was the approval granted by the Chad authorities. The fact-finding mission to Sudan. The fact-finding mission into human rights was started on 2 March 2025. Over a period of 10 days, the mission interviewed around 40 witnesses, including victims, journalists, medical doctors, psychiatrists, lawyers, human rights defenders, and representatives of NGOs operating in Sudan and neighboring countries. Some witnesses also provided written or audiovisual evidence documenting the reported atrocities. The mission is also currently in the process of drafting its preliminary report, which will be submitted at the plenary session of the Commission for adoption. In the north of Darfur, by Sudanese armed forces, and the declaration calls for the cessation of hostilities and independent investigation without restrictions. Condemnation of atrocities, mass atrocities committed on 14 April 2025, I published a press communique for Sudan condemning the massacre of civil. By the communique denounced an humanitarian infrastructure and calls for immediate cessation of violence and mechanisms and total humanitarian access. Republic of Benin, 22 January 2025, as signed with a special reporter on the freedom of expression, an appeal addressed to the President of Benin concerning the suspension of several media. The letter mentioned potential violations of Article 9 of the African Charter and to safeguard the freedom of expression. Now on to the part concerning the report on the situation of torture and other poor treatment in Africa. The term torture, as you are well aware, is any act when physical acts are inflicted to any person in order to obtain from them information or confessions. I'll spare you of the definition that you are all aware of. This report this half-yearly report on the situation of torture and poor treatment is established in accordance with the terms of reference of the CPT. The Committee for the Prevention Against Torture, as you well know, has implemented guidelines of the Robben Island. We start with the positive evolution of the prevention and the banning of torture and poor treatment and punishment in Africa. As concerning the United Nations Convention on the Torture, on 18 November 2024, the United Nations Committee on Torture present its final observations on the third periodic report on Namibia. The committee observed the legislative measures taken, especially punishment in school, protection of women and children and victims of the human trafficking. 21 November 2024, the United Nations Committee Against Torture presented its final observations on the sixth periodic report of Cameroon. Since its fifth periodic report that was examined in 2017, the committee congratulated the ratification of 5 instruments relating to the human rights. The subcommittee of the United Nations for the Prevention Against the SPT, the 1st to 7 December 2024, the subcommittee went to the Democratic Republic of Congo. That was the first meeting in the DRC in accordance with the normal procedure. They visited several prisons and discussed with the competent authority and prisoners in order to better understand the violations of liberty. Now, ratification. With regard to the ratification of the line 4, we're not going to mention all the African states that have ratified it. We're always delighted about this. 52 states have already ratified this convention, and we're expecting until today the ratification of 2 states. That's the United Republic of Tanzania and Zimbabwe. Now 4. Since the previous report, no African state signed the optional protocol against torture. 25 African states have ratified ACHPR. 7 other states are signatories but have not yet ratified: Angola, Cameroon, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Chad, and Gambia. Compliance with ACHPR. Since the last report, states have identified that as non-compliant with Article 17 of ACHPR in the establishing of national prevention mechanisms. The 10 states Benin, Burundi, Gabon, Ghana, Liberia, Madagascar, Nigeria, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan, South Sudan. We have other positive evolutions since February 2025. The Chadian government decided to pay reparations to victims. From 3rd to 14 February 2025, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations against torture, Mrs. Alice Edwards, went to the Republic of Senegal. 12 March 2025, the Subcommittee of the United Nations for the Prevention Against Torture ordered the establishment of a prevention mechanism in Benin, Madagascar, Liberia, and in South Africa, and proceedings against civil servants against torture and poor treatment were pointed out. On 18 November 2024, the United Nations Committee Against Torture recognized the dismissal of police officers in Namibia. 21 November 2025, the United Committee underscored in its final observations for the 6th periodic report on Cameroon that the state that deployed efforts to investigate acts of violence committed in the southwest and northwest regions by the forced security forces and the separatist groups. But these offenses have not been punished. On 15 November 2024, the Conference of Heads of State and Government in ECOWAS approved the establishment of a special tribunal for Gambia responsible for judging torture crimes committed under Yahya Jammeh. And in 2025 February, held the Tanzania responsible for not protecting people against albinos against torture. Now on to the concerns: the banning and the prevention of torture and poor treatment and punishment in Africa. Extraditional executions, death sentence, and forced disappearances. 3rd October 2024, Mr. Adwan, this expert of the High Commissioner for United Nations for Sudan called on the Sudan to protect civilians based on the report on summary executions on 18 November 2024. The UN underscored incapacity of Namibia to investigate against crimes committed under the fight against liberation fight. 20 November 2024, the UN presented its final observations on the 6th periodic report on Cameroon and expressed its concern faced with the many violations and unfair trials. January 2025, the Mr. Volker Turk expressed his concern based on the information on summary executions in Khartoum in the north of Sudan. 5th March 2025, a report of the United Nations Committee exhorted the attacks targeting Muslims and asylum seekers in Sudan in the Central African Republic should be held responsible. The attacks and summary executions and torture and sexual violence. Security measures, terrorism and torture. 8 November 2024, several mandate holders for the special position of the United Nations sent a letter to the Egyptian government where they expressed their concern on the project to modify the Criminal Procedure Code and the need to respect the obligations of regarding human rights. The Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees that more than 700 civilians were killed and more than 1,300 were wounded. Since members of the mission to establish facts of the United met 200 civilians that reported so many murders and other forms of sexual violence, torture, and poor detention conditions. On 1st October 2024, the Special Rapporteur for the United Nations requested information from the Libyan army concerning the arrest and arbitrary detention of Sheikh Makte and Amin Debouche and other religious leaders. 3rd October 2024, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on Torture expressed its concern on the displacement of the Bedouin community in Egypt and the arbitrary detention of 54 people after protest. 21 November 2024, the United Nations Committee Against Torture expressed its concern concerning the deplorable conditions in the prison areas in Cameroon. It mentioned issues concerning the poor health conditions and the availability of food and water as a lack of personnel. December 2024, the Association for the Prevention Against Torture published its global report of women in prison, including especially from South Africa, Burkina, Cape Verde, Mauritania, Morocco, Senegal, Togo, and Tunisia. The problem on torture that were mentioned include prison sentences that are disproportionate, prolonged detention period, risk of sexual violence, and as well as the use of forced means. In the subcommittee against prevention, launched an appeal for the Democratic Republic to develop a national mechanism for prevention. The 17th January 2025, Dewa John Juma died in detention in Cameroon with allegations of torture during their detention. Human rights appeal for independent investigation. The special reporter in Senegal declared that Senegal should adopt bold measures to ensure the detention should be in accordance with international standards. 28 February 2025, AFIAC had requested the freedom of the journalist Sandra Mu, detained arbitrarily since April 2024. 27 February, several special rapporteurs of the United Nations asked for the immediate release of the activists in detention. And in Egypt, 6 March 2025, report on United Nations on Sudan decried the poor treatment and tortures from the Sudanese military. Excessive use of force against protesters in October 2024. Communication was published for against harassment on students for global democracy in Uganda. Among those feature Mike Samade, Mr. Samuel, Mr. Jean Bosco Timothy. On 9 October 2024, post-electoral violence were raised in Mozambique, including attacks against journalists, militants, and protesters. 17 October, experts of the United Nations called United Nations to put an end to the violation of human rights committed against members of political parties, civil society organizations, and journalists for elections that were scheduled for November 2024. 17 October 2024, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on Torture published a communication to the Comoros based on information on harassment against protesters. 28 November 2024, the United expressed in its final observations on the third periodic report of Namibia its concerns on police violence and torture during protests. 20 February 2025, Human Rights expressed its concern after the abduction of the activist Abduk that was found the next day in traces of torture in Guinea. 7 March 2025, Ameba militant was killed by a bullet in South Africa. Attack against immigrants. 7 October 2025, Human Rights expressed its concern on Sudanese refugees due to fight between government and militias. 17 November 2024, United Nations Against Torture expressed its concern after the declaration of Namibia and mentioning that it would not repeal Article 25 of the law of 1999 on the recognizing and the control of refugees. November 2024, the committee expressed its concerns information to expel asylum seekers in Cameroon, mentioning security reasons. Other concerns were also raised concerning refugees and asylum seekers of Nigeria that are victims of poor treatment. 17 December, the committee expressed its concern to the Egyptian government concerning the law on asylum recently adopted, noting that its ratification could have serious repercussions on the rights of immigrants and asylum seekers. 3rd February, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights published a declaration expressing its profound concern on sub-Saharan migrants in Libya after allegations of kidnapping and torture. Other concerns. How much time do I have? How much time do I still have? Yeah. The other concerns. 19 November 2024, the committee expressed its concern the fact that children from 7 to 12 years could be punished in Namibia. December, Human Rights raised that rapid forces raped women and girls and keeping them as sexual slaves. 14 February 25, Amnesty decided 19 February, the International Committee of the Red Cross published its statistics on South Sudan for 2024, mentioning so many people had disappeared, more than 6,000 prisoners. Between the 17 and 20 February 2025, the independent experts of the United went to South Sudan for a Fafani mission. 28 February 2025, the UN realized that the Sudan leaders encouraged violence. And finally, 7 March 2025, the United Nations Human Rights Commission expressed its concern for violence against women in Sudan due to the current conflict. And to the last paragraph of this report concerning the recommendations. In the light of the following recommendations can be formulated concerning the mandate of the OPCAT to prevent torture and other poor treatment. One, the states that have not yet don't have to ratify the conventions. They also have to ratify the optional precaution. in accordance to Article 17 of the protocol. All states have to criminalize torture and other poor treatment. All states have to ensure that no declaration obtained through torture should be admitted as evidence. States need to take measures and use general laws and other laws on state security. States have to revise national laws to protect people against forced disappearances, torture, and other poor treatment by banning secret detention and criminalize the use of this secret detention or non-authorized centers in accordance with the Global Island guidelines. States have to develop mechanisms that have to receive complaints against poor treatment. States have to open investigations that are impartial on all allegations of torture and other poor treatment and ensure that the perpetrators of these acts should be brought to book and be punished. States should have to respect and protect the rights of people and acts of torture. This includes, but it's not limited to, persons suffering from intellectual disabilities, including children and albinos, migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons. States have to guarantee that the victims of torture and poor treatment should have rights to all the forms of reparation, incorporating the reparations, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. In accordance with the African Charter, all the parties to the conflict have to respect the humanitarian law in accordance with the Geneva Protocol. States have to ensure and implement the recommendations formulated by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and United Nations organs to ban and prevent torture and other poor treatment. Any person having information concerning allegations of torture and poor treatment should report these allegations to the Committee for the Prevention Against Torture. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm sorry to have tortured you. You have the floor. Thank you. I see Algeria also requested for the floor. So before we go to the NHRIs, I'm going to ask the director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria to take the floor for 5 minutes on torture.
to which Algeria did in 1989. This commitment are enshrined in Algeria national legal framework. The 2020 constitution prohibits torture and inhuman degrading treatment under any circumstances. The Algerian Penal Code also criminalizes acts of torture, providing for stringent sanctions in line with the definition set forth in the Convention Against Torture. Furthermore, the National Human Rights Council, a constitutionally independent body, is entrusted with monitoring the respect of human rights and empowered to conduct regular and unannounced visits to places of detention and receive complaints. Within the Ministry of Justice, a dedicated mechanism monitors places of deprivation of liberty, supported by regular inspections by the judiciary and administrative oversight bodies. In addition, International Committee of the Red Cross regularly visits prisons and police custody facilities the country in accordance with established cooperative throughout the country in accordance with the established cooperative modalities. Algeria has submitted its periodic reports under the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism, most recently in 2022, where it accepted several recommendations related to strengthening safeguard against torture, including those addressing training, legal reform, and improvement of detention conditions. The country continued to undertake substantial reforms in the penitentiary system, including the construction of new correctional facilities in line with international standards, the expansion of rehabilitation and vocational programs, and the provision of medical screening upon entry into detention. In instances where allegations of mistreatments by isolated individuals arise, the competent authorities address such cases with full transparency and seriousness, conducting judicial investigation and prosecuting those responsible. My delegation will be interested to know how the committee or the working group envisions strengthening info respect for the sovereignty of states and the diversity of national legal systems, a tailored technical cooperation with member states, including those that are not parties of the OPCAT optional protocol, in support for their efforts to prevent torture through a spirit of constructive dialogue and partnership. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Le commissaire à thème répondra. Je vois que Cabo Verde.
Cabo Verde would also like to take a floor and make their comments for 5 minutes. You've got 5 minutes, Cabo Verde.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to apologize for taking the floor without asking before. I'm taking the floor to congratulate the Commissioner for the presentation of this report. Namely, regarding the situation of torture in our continent. Having mentioned, even though a quick one, of Cape Verde, I would like to ask him to share with our delegation details that can allow us to better understand what was mentioned in his report about Cape Verde, and eventually identify a way, being the permanent representatives of Cape Verde at AU and also at this commission, see how we can contribute so that the situation that was identified in his report which was a concern raised by an entity or individual to this commission, and that was raised by the commissioner, could help us to solve this situation. I hope that we can present the objectives of Cape Verde by trying to be actively present in all organs of AU. I wasn't expecting to do this in this session, but take into account that our country was mentioned in this report, and take into account that we are available to cooperate with all AU institutions and organs, we would like to have more information about what was mentioned in the report to help us to be useful in providing clarifications that might help to solve an eventual issue regarding the subject addressed. Take into account that Cape Verde is a country where the right of freedom of speech is enjoyed by everyone, and it's a reality. And also we have a legal system that, as we know, works very well. So any issue existing that was not able to be solved by the legal system and other organs in our country, we would be here available to clarify. So we are available for the Commission to provide any clarification about the issue that was raised in the report.
Assign on his report. And just in brief, I would like to call him to pay attention to the important possible meeting with the National Committee on Investigation on Crimes and Violations of National Law and International Law in the Sudan and the National Commission for Human Rights, that the report is going to be accomplished, will be incomplete without meeting all the law enforcement also institutions and those parts. This is very important, and we are ready to hear from him, as I said before. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Je finis avec les délégations des États. Je vais du côté des NHRI, South African Human Rights Commission.
NHRI's South African Human Rights Commission.
Les droits de l'homme du Sénégal, Fatou Thiam. Fatou Thiam. She's not present. Fatou Thiam, not. Je passe.
بولين برغاس. انتظروا قليلا.
The ICJ welcomes the resolution adopted by the Commission at its 82nd session in March this year, mandating the Committee for the Prevention of Torture to develop a model law on criminalising torture in Africa. The ICJ recalls that torture is a crime under international law and all states have an obligation to criminalise all forms of torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment and prosecute those responsible. We shared the Commission's concern at the practice of torture across Africa and the impunity often enjoyed by perpetrators. For example, in Egypt, torture is both widespread and systematic, rising to the level of a crime against humanity. Perpetrated by the National Security Agency, national police and intelligence agencies against persons detained for political reasons, amongst others, torture in Egypt effectively forms part of a state policy enabled by Egypt's counter-terrorism laws and measures. The judiciary and state prosecution services, including the Supreme State Security Prosecution, provide an enabling environment that facilitates the commission of torture with impunity. This year, the ICJ co-published a legal briefing concerning a mass trial before the East Cairo Military Court, in which 184 defendants with alleged connections to the Muslim Brotherhood political movement were prosecuted. Following the arrest and detention of the accused, the NSA subjected 111 of them to torture and ill treatment, including electrocution, hanging from the ceiling by their hands, and beatings leading to broken bones. In many cases, the NSA extracted forced confessions from the detainees, which were later unlawfully admitted as evidence by the military court. Despite being presented with first-hand evidence of the injuries sustained by the defendants in NSA detention, the public and military prosecution failed to investigate these allegations. Following a trial marred by further serious fair trial rights violations, the military court convicted and sentenced 159 of the defendants on identical counter-terrorism and fake news charges. 5 of the defendants received sentences. The ICJ condemns Egypt's failure to address torture and officials' impunity for the practice through the new draft criminal procedure code, recently adopted by Parliament but yet entered into law. It unacceptably retains provisions that restrict the rights of victims and survivors to hold public officials accountable for the crime of torture, including by exclusively authorizing public prosecutors to decide whether to initiate an investigation into the conduct of public officials, and by limiting the rights of defendants to appeal the decisions of public prosecutors. Honourable Chairman and Honourable Commissioner, the ICJ calls on the Commission and the Committee to urge Egypt to 1. Quash the convictions and sentences of all defendants convicted further trials in which evidence from torture was admitted. 2. Immediately investigate all credible allegations of torture and provide redress to victims of torture in line with international human rights law and standards, including the Charter and the standards set out by the Robben Island Guidelines and this Commission's General Comment number 4 on Article 5 of the Charter. And finally, 3. Refrain from promulgating the new draft code of criminal procedure. Thank you, Honourable Chairman and Honourable Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. I see now Mr. Moulay Lassen Naji is back. You can take the floor on behalf of the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies.
Honourable Chair, I will be speaking on the next mechanism, not this one.
Thank you very much. Merci, Naji. Je vais demander au commissaire, à l'honorable commissaire Hatem SAM de prendre la parole pour faire les observations finales, conclusives par rapport aux interventions des États.
Based on the intervention of states, NHRIs, and civil society organizations. Commissioner Hatem, you have the floor. Commissioner Hatem, you may now take the floor to respond to the comments made. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to thank all representatives of states and institutions who took the floor on the report which I presented. I'll first of all thank the ambassadors for their comments. First of all, the ambassador of Sudan, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to him and for his invitation for us to visit Sudan and to meet all the authorities, human rights activists, as well as victims in Sudan. The ambassador of Cape Verde, I would like to thank him for his reaction, and we are at his disposal to give further details on what he mentioned in the report. And I'd like to congratulate him personally and on behalf of my colleagues, Commissioner Manuela Teresa, because we're at prayer and we're well received, and we heard about the current state of human rights. All the doors were open to us. And personally, as in terms of civility in this country, Mr. Ambassador, I saw it firsthand. And everything is working in the country. In that country, the people are educated. And I would like to congratulate you. So I'll give you details on the concerns which you raised. I would also like to congratulate the Algerian representative on what he has said about Algeria and the state of human rights in Algeria. Lastly, with regard to the representative of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, we have taken note of what he has said and would try to transmit your concerns to the appropriate quarters. So, Chair, that is what I had to say concerning the comments and to enrich all the comments made in the hall. I thank you, and I hand you back the microphone. Thank you, Commissioner Hatem, and I think this brings to an end the presentation of this report. The report has been presented. The interaction has taken place with the states and the NHRIs, and we would like to congratulate Commissioner Hatem for the first report on behalf of the African Commission at this 83rd ordinary session. And please give him a round of applause.
She will be presenting the report from Mauritius. She couldn't make it to come here. If there is any issue, Commissioner Derso is there to take the floor and present the report for the Special Rapporteur of Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. Commissaire Topsy, est-ce que vous êtes en ligne?
Yes, Chair, I'm online, but my internet is very bad. Can I ask Commissioner Derso to...
Do you want us to give to Commissioner Derso, or you can make it yourself?
I'll try. Can I try?
Yes, try. If it's difficult, Commissioner Derso will take his responsibility. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Secretariat, President of International.
Commissioner Topsy, there is an echo. Interpreters are saying that it will be very difficult for them to interpret. We apologize. Can you try again? If it's difficult, Commissioner Derso will make it. Can you try again? Do you have headphones? Your mic is off, and please use headphones. Commissioner Topsy.
No, sorry, Chair. My internet is very good.
Do you have headphones?
Chair?
Yeah.
I please ask Commissioner Dessers is not very good. My internet is very good.
It's an issue of internet. She said it. Okay, we understand that you have some internet issues. In this case, can you allow us to give the floor to Commissioner Derso on your behalf?
Yes, please.
Thank you for your understanding. Commissaire Derso va donc, vu qu'elle a des difficultés avec Internet en île Maurice pour le moment, Commissaire Derso va présenter.
So we'll therefore present a report for 15 minutes. Commissioner Derso, please.
Distinguished delegates of member states, national human rights institutions, and civil society organizations. I will be reading the report of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information, Commissioner Topsy Sono. Article 9 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights provides that, I quote, every individual shall have the right to receive information, and every individual shall have the right to express and disseminate his opinions within the law. The special mechanism on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa was established by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to monitor adherence to freedom of expression standards and to propose appropriate recommendations to the Commission and states parties. It was subsequently expanded to include the right to access to information. This report is presented in accordance with Rules 25(3) and 64 of the Commission's Rules of Procedure 2020 and covers activities undertaken by the Special Mechanism on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa during the intersession period, November 2024 to May 2025. Activities involving the special mechanism. Protection activities. These protection activities cover press release and urgent appeals. In line with the special mechanism's mandate to make public interventions where violations of the right to freedom of expression and access to information have been brought to the mechanism's attention, including by issuing public statements, press releases, and sending appeals to member states asking for clarification, the following interventions were initiated or issued. Joint letter of urgent appeal to Benin. On 27 January 2025, a joint letter of urgent appeal was issued in collaboration with the Commissioner Rapporteur for the human rights situation in the Republic of Benin in response to reports on the suspension of various media outlets by the High Authority for Audiovisual and Communication. These suspensions were accompanied by the revocation of press credentials for the publisher Dawda's Enfos, Mr. Amold Alingo. The letter requested clarification regarding the suspension of the media outlets and called on the government of Benin to reaffirm the indispensable role of the media at the fourth estate by taking all necessary measures to provide journalists and other media practitioners with the environment conducive to free expression without undue interference or fear of reprisal from state and non-state actors. On 31 January 2025, a joint letter of urgent appeal was issued in collaboration with the Commissioner Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in the Republic of Guinea and Chairperson of the Working Group on Death Penalty, Extrajudicial, Summary, or Arbitrary Killings and Enforced Disappearances in Africa. The latter was issued in response to allegations of the abduction and enforced disappearance of Mr. Habib Marone Kamara on 3 December 2024 by armed men in military uniforms. Reports indicated that his next of kin had no information on his whereabouts nor the reason for his abduction. The letter requested clarification regarding the reported enforced disappearance of Mr. Kamara, called on the government to urgently carry out an independent and impartial investigations into Mr. Kamara's whereabouts, in addition to taking the necessary measures to ensure that the domestic laws of Guinea reflect the absolute prohibition against enforced disappearances. On 31 January 2025, a joint letter of urgent appeal was issued in collaboration with the chairperson of the working group on death penalty, extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary killings and enforced disappearances in Africa, in addition to the Commissioner Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in the Republic of Mozambique, following reports of the enforced disappearance and death of Mr. Arlindo Chizale. Reports indicate that the death of Mr. Chizale was confirmed by his brother on 22 January 2025, 15 days after his disappearance on 07 January 2025. The letter called on authorities to carry out investigations into the reported enforced disappearance and death of Mr. Chizale, ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice with effective remedy and reparation provided to Mr. Chizale's immediate family and dependents, in addition to adopting laws prohibiting the crime of enforced disappearance. On 21 February 2025, a joint letter of urgent appeal was issued in collaboration with the Commissioner Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in the Republic of Mali, in addition to the chairperson of the working group on death penalty, extrajudicial summary, or arbitrary killings and enforced disappearance in Africa. The letter was issued in response to allegations regarding the abduction of Mr. Dawda Magasa, a member of the Coordination de Mouvement Associations, CMAS, on 05 February 2025 by Malian intelligence agents in civilian clothes. The letter, inter alia, requested information on the veracity of the allegations and called on the government of Mali to investigate the abduction of Mr. Magasa in order to determine his whereabouts and secure his release. On 2 April 2025, a joint letter of urgent appeal was issued in collaboration with the Commissioner Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in Burkina Faso regarding the alleged abduction and arbitrary detention of Mr. Guzoma Sanogo, a journalist with Radio Television du Burkina and president of the Association of Journalists of Burkina Faso, AGB, and Mr. Bukari Oba, an investigative journalist and vice president of AGB, on Monday, 24 March 2025, by individuals claiming to be from the intelligence service. Further reports indicate that the alleged arrest was perpetrated without any legal warrant. The letter requested clarification regarding the reported abduction, arbitrary detention, and called on the authorities to urgently carry out an independent and impartial investigation, in addition to taking all reasonable measures to ensure their immediate relief. On 9 April 2025, a letter of urgent appeal was issued regarding the conviction and sentencing of Ms. Sandra Muhoza, a journalist working with online media, La Nova Burundi, reportedly based on information that Ms. Muhoza had shared in a private WhatsApp group for media professionals. The latter requested clarification on the allegations and further called on the authorities to ensure the right to privacy, including the confidentiality of personal communication. Letter of commendation. In addition to interventions in situations where violations have occurred, the special mechanism issues letters of commendation and appreciation, noting efforts to implement the right of access to information and freedom of expression. On 28 April 2025, a joint letter of commendation was issued in collaboration with the Commissioner Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in Nigeria, welcoming the recent judgment of the Supreme Court of Nigeria on the Freedom of Information Act 2011, which unanimously affirmed that this act applies to all tiers of government, including state institutions. In its judgment, I quote, the court noted that FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, enacted to promote transparency, citizen engagement, and accountability in public governance, is binding across the Federation, end quote. This landmark decision marks a reversal of the majority ruling by the Court of Appeal, Benin Division, which held that this act only applies to federal authorities, departments, and agencies. Statement commemorating World Press Freedom Day. On 3 May 2025, a press statement was issued which reiterated the fundamental principles of press freedom. The statement deplored recent reports of violations of freedom of expression and press freedom, including the arrest, detention, and conviction of journalists on the basis of laws which are not justifiable and compatible with international human rights law and standards, among others. The marked increase in reports of the enforced disappearances of journalists and media personalities was also strongly condemned, with the state's parties called on to take effective legal and other measures to investigate, prosecute, and punish perpetrators of attacks against journalists and other media practitioners, and further to provide effective remedies. Promotion activities. The following promotion activities were undertaken during the intersession period. Briefing by Access Now on internet shutdowns on 14 March 2025, briefing on the human rights situation in the occupied territories of Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic on 19 March 2025, meeting with the Council of Europe's Cybercrime Program Office to discuss possible areas of collaboration on 24 March 2025, delivering keynote address during the webinar on internet shutdown webinar on 25 March 2025, meeting to discuss issues related to disinformation with ICNL on 10 April 2025, consultation with the Ethiopia National Human Rights Institution and civil society organizations on Ethiopia's periodic report on 17 April 2025, delivering opening statement at the electoral stakeholder engagement for Gambia and Malawi on 23 April 2025, meeting stakeholders to discuss celebrations for World Press Freedom Day 2025. Assessment of the human rights supervised by the mechanism in Africa. Access to information. The right to information enshrined in Article 9.1 of the African Charter is a fundamental human right necessary for the enjoyment of other human rights. The right to seek and receive information is essential for a transparent and accountable government. A crucial element to ensure effective enforcement of this right is through the enactment of national laws on access to information. To date, 29 states in Africa have adopted such laws. The list of these states is provided in paragraph 22. An additional important aspect to ensure the right to access to information is through the adoption of judgments by courts, which reinforce the importance of this right. And to this end, the special mechanism commends the Supreme Court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as mentioned earlier, for its landmark judgment, which unanimously affirmed the Freedom of Information Act as being applicable to all tiers of government in Nigeria, both at the federal and state level. This judgment will undoubtedly further enhance implementation of the right to access to information in Nigeria. Freedom of expression. on the safety of journalists. The Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa provides in Principle 20 that states shall guarantee the safety of journalists and other media practitioners. In order to buttress this, the Commission has adopted a number of resolutions which have condemned attacks against journalists, media practitioners, in addition to attacks directed against media houses. During the intersession period, the special mechanism has received reports of attacks against journalists in Somalia, allegations of the enforced disappearances of a number of journalists and columnists in Burkina Faso, in addition to reports of the forced unlawful conscription of individuals. Additionally, reports of journalists being harassed, attacked, and detained while reporting on election-related events are recurring. As noted in the Commission's World Press Freedom Day statement, issued on 3 May 2025, the Commission strongly condemns all attacks on press freedom, particularly the reported abductions and enforced disappearances, and calls on states to ensure that these violations are investigated and prosecuted. Freedom of expression and access to information on the Internet. Principle 5 of the Declaration provides that the exercise of the right to freedom of expression and access to information shall be protected from interference both online and offline. In order to enhance promotion and protection of these rights online, the Commission recently adopted Resolution 630 on developing guidelines to assist states monitor technology companies in respect of their duty to maintain information integrity through independent fact-checking, and Resolution 631 on working towards the assessment of public interest content in this digital era and developing guidelines to ensure a public interest element for all platforms operating in Africa. These two resolutions mandate the special mechanism to develop soft law documents with the aim to guide states parties and other stakeholders, enhance promotion and protection of the rights enshrined in Article 9 of the African Charter. Conclusions and recommendations. Two state parties. 1. Adopt legislation on the right to access to information in accordance with international standards and as elaborated in the Commission's model law on access to information for Africa. 2. Appoint independent oversight mechanisms mandated to monitor implementation of national legislation on access to information. 3. Adopt laws or policies to ensure the protection of journalists and media practitioners, and specifically during election period. Investigate all reports of attacks against journalists, including reports of enforced disappearance and forced conscription of journalists, and adopt laws criminalizing enforced disappearance in accordance with the Commission's guidelines on the protection of all persons from enforced disappearances in Africa. 5. Support the initiatives of the special mechanism in order to ensure protection of the rights enshrined in Article 9 of the African Charter. To NHRIs and NGOs. 1. Popularize the soft law documents adopted by the Commission related to freedom of expression and access to information. 2. Collaborate with the special mechanisms through submission of reports and complaints on violations of the right to freedom of expression and access to information in Africa. And 3. Support the initiatives of the special mechanism in order to ensure protection of the rights enshrined in Article 9 of the African Charter. I thank you for your attention.
much, Mr. Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Commissioners, Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished delegates, all protocols observed.
Can you speak close to the mic, please?
Excuse me?
Can you speak close to the mic?
Okay. The Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic welcomes the report of the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, who happens to also be the Commissioner covering the Sahrawi Republic, and commends the attention she paid to these crucial freedoms. We also encourage Her Excellency to undertake more interactive communications and interactions with the Sahrawi civil society, human rights defenders, and victims of violations, and we are ready to facilitate her task should she require our assistance. Sorry. Meanwhile, the Sahrawi Republic expresses grave concerns over the systematic suppression of freedom of expression and of access to information in the occupied territories of Western Sahara. Despite international legal obligations, Moroccan colonial authorities continue to employ repressive measures to silence Sahrawi voices advocating for self-determination and human rights. Human Rights Watch reports that Moroccan authorities have escalated harassment of activists, journalists, and human rights defenders, subjecting them to unfair trials and detentions. Laws criminalizing nonviolent speech, particularly those challenging Morocco's claim over Western Sahara, are routinely and systematically enforced to asphyxiate opposition. The use of spyware against activists further exemplifies the extent of repression. Amnesty International's Security Lab found that Aminatu Haidar, a multi-human rights award-winning human rights defender, was targeted and infected by Pegasus spyware between 2018 and 2021. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention determined that Sahrawi media activist Mohammed al-Bambari was arbitrarily detained by Moroccan authorities, violating his due process rights. The working group called for his immediate release and reparation, something that never happened. Moroccan authorities have also misused laws to silence reporters. In 2019, Nazha Khalidi, affiliated with ACHPR Media in El Ayoun, was arrested for live streaming a street scene and accused of not meeting the requirements to call herself a journalist. She faced up to 2 years in prison if convicted. Amnesty International reports also that authorities have restricted dissent and the right to peaceful assembly. In May 2023, police surveilled the house of activist Mahfouz al-Fqir in Laayoune, beating visitors and verbally insulting her family. In September, law enforcement officers forcibly dispersed a peaceful protest in Laayoune, assaulting at least 23 Sahrawi protesters. These actions constitute a clear violation of international human rights standards, including the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The Sahrawi Democratic Republic urged the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to take decisive actions to address these violations and ensure the protection of freedom of expression and access to information in Western Sahara. We kindly call upon the Commission to condemn the ongoing suppression of freedoms of expression and access to information in Western Sahara. Urge Moroccan authorities to cease harassment, arbitrary detention of activists, journalists, and human rights defenders, to advocate for independent investigations into allegations of abuse and surveillance against Sahrawi activists, to support the establishment of a permanent mechanism to monitor human rights in Western Sahara. In conclusion, the Sahrawi people remain steadfast in their pursuit for self-determination and justice. We appeal to the international community to stand in solidarity with our struggle and to uphold the principles of human and people's rights and dignity for all, without exclusion or exception. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
to begin by congratulating the esteemed Commissioner on the presentation of her intersectional report on freedom of expression in Africa. As you know, the presentation of her report coincides with our celebration yesterday of World Press Freedom Day, commemorated annually on May the 3rd. On this occasion, Reporters Without Borders, in its annual report released last Friday, ranked my country, Mauritania, first in the Arab world, 5th in Africa, and 15th globally. The organization cited that since the decriminalization of press offenses in 2011, journalists have been able to work in a less repressive environment. This ranking stands as a significant recognition of the government's efforts to professionalize the media sector and enable it to operate in an atmosphere marked by freedom and professionalism. To this end, my country's government has taken several measures, including but not limited to the implementation of the Professional Decree of Journalist Law, the integration process of public media collaborators, which is now nearing completion, doubling the financial ceiling of the fund supporting the private press, and last but not least, the financial assistance granted by His Excellency the President of the Republic to the widows and children of deceased journalists. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We congratulate your country, qui est le premier pays dans le monde arabe.
Country in the Arab world to be ranked in that position by Reporters Without Borders. There are no further states that requested the floor. Now I'm going to give the floor to NHRIs. The Senegalese Human Rights Commission, National Human Rights Commission, she's not here. Efadutiam is not here. For the NGOs.
For her report. The ICJ is deeply concerned at the Tunisian and Egyptian authorities intensifying crackdown on freedom of expression. In Tunisia, the criminal justice system continues to be instrumentalized against free voices, including lawyers, journalists, bloggers, political opponents, and human rights defenders, often through vague provisions under counter-terrorism legislation and draconian criminal law provisions concerning fake news, contrary to this Commission's Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression, which calls on states to repeal laws that criminalize sedition, insult, and publication of false news. The case of lawyer and journalist Sonia Dahmani, currently serving an 8-month prison sentence and facing additional charges solely for having criticized the authorities' policies against sub-Saharan migrants, starkly exemplifies the repression of dissent in the country. Another lawyer, Ahmed Soab, defense counsel in the so-called conspiracy case, is in detention facing counter-terrorism charges for having criticized the verdict. Furthermore, 2 prominent journalists, Murad Zaghedi and Borhan Bazais, are each serving a 1-year prison term simply for expressing their opinions on social media. In Egypt, the authorities continue to subject critical voices, including political opponents and journalists, to arbitrary arrest and detention, enforced disappearance and torture for the mere exercise of their rights to freedom of expression. For example, Ashraf Omar, a political satire artist, was arrested on 20th of July 2024 and taken to an undisclosed location where he was held for more than 48 hours. His wife later declared that National Security Agency officers had tortured him, including by threatening to subject him to electric shocks. He remains in detention to this day. His wife and journalist who interviewed her regarding her husband's arrests were, in turn, arrested in January 2025. The journalist remains in detention. Additionally, on the 20th of October 2024, political economist Dr. Abdul Farouk, known for his publications criticizing state policies, was arrested and charged with joining a terrorist group and spreading false news. From the circumstances of Dr. Farouk's arrest and search of his home, his interrogation, and his previous arrest and detention on somewhat similar charges in 2018, it appears evident that his detention is related to his expression of political opinions critical of the Egyptian government. Despite serious medical ailments and his suffering a heart attack whilst in detention, he continues to be held in poor detention conditions pending trial. Additionally, on 6th of February 2024, an Egyptian court convicted and sentenced prominent political opponent Ahmed Tantawi to 1 year's imprisonment on charges of printing and circulating presidential election documents without authorization. A few days ago, the Egyptian authorities summoned him for questioning in 2 new cases, a move designed to dissuade him from continuing his opposition activities after his upcoming release on the 26th of May. In conclusion, the ICJ urges the Honourable Special Rapporteur to call on Egypt and Tunisia to immediately release all those currently arbitrarily detained for the mere exercise of their right to freedom of expression, and to repeal laws that criminalize sedition, insult, and publication of false news, in line with the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. Thank you.
Do we have Susan Jean Kemutoko or Mrs. Wanijewu Kamanda? You've got 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. Access to accurate, timely, and non-judgmental information on sexual and reproductive health and rights is a critical component of the right to the freedom of expression and access to information. And it's also a critical enabler to the enjoyment of other rights, including the right to health. The denial of access to accurate information on sexual and reproductive health increases the vulnerability of adolescents to teenage pregnancy and contributes to the rise in new HIV infections amongst adolescents, which are significant challenges many African countries face. While we appreciate the efforts that are underway across many member states to reduce the prevalence of teenage pregnancy and the resultant school dropouts amongst adolescent girls, we do note with concern that misinformation and disinformation on sexual and reproductive health and rights continues to counter these efforts. In many countries across Africa, adolescents are subjected to contradictory and inaccurate messages and information about sexuality, about contraception, about menstruation and pregnancy from various platforms, including social media, their peers, and communities. Inaccurate information coupled with pervasive silence and shame exposes our young people to significant risks, including, as mentioned, the unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, gender-based violence, including sexual violence, and sexually transmitted infections. The failure to ensure that national policies and laws are developed and implemented to ensure access to accurate, non-judgmental information on sexual and reproductive health, including through provision of age-appropriate, scientifically accurate, and rights-based comprehensive sexuality education, exacerbates this crisis and further also impedes adolescents' access to life-saving information and services. Therefore, in the face of rising anti-rights narratives, misinformation and disinformation, we humbly urge that the Commission calls upon states and state parties to ensure access and to enhance and protect the right to access accurate and timely sexual and reproductive health information for adolescents. This will be an essential life-saving strategy, advancing and promoting adolescent well-being, equipping them with information and empowering them to make informed decisions about their health and lives. Thank you, Honorable Chair and Commissioners.
Reporters Sans Frontières, Jean Lagarde, you've got 3 minutes, please. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Ladies, distinguished commissioners, Reporters Sans Frontières would like to intervene regard to the press situation in Burundi. She would like to express his concerns with the arbitrary determination of the Burundi's journalist Sandra Musa. Nova Mozambique was condemned, sentenced 16 October 2025 to 1 year in prison. She laid in a private WhatsApp group information concerning the distribution of arms by the government in place. An appeal was scheduled on the 4th March was postponed 3 times for doubtful motives like the unavailability of the car that had to take her to the prison because of lack of fuel. The appeal finally took place 26 March, and the position said there was a contact between the journalist and the activist and the media in exile. And his appeal was expected on 26th of April. The appeal court decided to open discussions to decide on the incompetence of the first judge. We fear a strategy to slow down the file more than 1 year after the imprisonment of the journalist. 10 March 2025, we seized the Special Rapporteur of the African Commission on Human Rights for the Freedom of Expression and Access to Information to inform them about the alarming situation of Sandra Mozwa. We got her answer to send an appeal to the Burundian authorities regarding Madame's Uja, and we hope that the authorities of the country will reply. The arbitrary detention of Sandra Mozwa comes at a time when critical time of the press in Burundi. She's the second woman to be sentenced in less than 2 years in the country. In January 2023, Florent Gambia, who was a host of a radio program, was sentenced to 10 years of in prison for treason in the country. After 700 days of detention, she was finally freed thanks to a presidential pardon in August 2024. Apart from these cases of imprisonment, the journalists in Burundi fear of being arrested and just a few months away of local and legislative elections. Brutal arrests during protests, recurrent harassing, violations of press freedoms increased. Several journalists have reported to have been victims of violence committed by the branch of the party in power, which is reputed for these issues. The latest case, a few days, a journalist was arrested and beaten up by students, Monica Rakore, and 28 April, when she went to the University of Burundi to conduct a report on the living conditions of students. In month of April, SNF pointed out 4 cases of arrest of journalists, and 2 would like to request you, honorable commissioners, in the light of foregoing, to call on the Burundian authorities to take the necessary measures to put an end to the violence against journalists so that they can freely practice their profession. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Lagarde. Thank you, Honorable Chair, distinguished commissioners. The judgments about 20 or 30 years for crimes because they expressed their opinion. The speaker is speaking too fast. Among the targeted journalists, the journalist was arrested in April after having disseminated information criticizing the government. The government also continued to violate the rights of journalists and persecution against journalists. Now, the arbitrary arrest and detention, prolonged preventive detention is used by the Tunisian government against journalists. Currently, there are about 25 cases of arrest in 2025, which attest to the escalation of violence perpetrated against journalists. Among these examples, we have journalist Muad, who was arrested arbitrarily and detained for a long time without any judgment. There is also the arrest of an activist and his judgment in a Secretariat, and he was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. There is also political prisoners, opinion prisoners. They are faced with grave violations of their rights and extortions in prisons. They also have issues to access to health and contact with their lawyers and visit by their families. So we appeal to the Commission to call upon the Tunisian government to repeal certain laws that are that violate national, regional, international instruments on freedoms of expression. So the Commission is urged to take that discussion with the government of Tunisia to put an end to this practice that is against and that's going to restrict the work of journalists. There's also an emergency or to take actions. That was will be the last NGO Africa Center for the Democracy and Human Rights.
For democracy and human rights studies, welcome the report submitted by the Special Rapporteur, and would like to stress some elements in relation to freedom of expression in Northern Africa, which is widely recognized as a fundamental human right, and it is protected under the international regional legal framework, including the Africa Charter on Human People's Rights. In Northern Africa, however, the journalists, media are under restrictive laws in relation to freedom of expression. They are in fact intimidated and repressed, and in some cases, the use of anti-terrorist law to suppress the journalists. The region is marked by a complex and often hostile environment for free speech, where government employ a range of legal, political, and social tools to restrict open discourse and to suppress the dissident. Across countries in Northern Africa, authorities routinely use a broad and vaguely worded laws such as those criminalizing fake news, defamations, and undermining national security to prosecute journalists, human rights defenders, opposition figures, and ordinary citizens. The media landscape in Northern Africa is often tightly controlled. State-owned or state-aligned media dominate the airwave, while independent outlets face a constant threat of closure, censorship, and financial blocks. Journalists and bloggers who attempt to report on sensitive issues such as corruption, human rights abuses, government mismanagement are frequently subject to harassment, intimidation, and even physical violence. Self-censorship is widespread, as many fear reprisals against themselves or their families. Digital expression is also under increasing threat. governments have expanded their surveillance capability and to enacted cyber crime, laws that criminalize online speeches, social media users. Despite these challenges, Northern Africa is home to vibrant civil society and courageous individuals who continue to advocate for greater freedom. Human rights organizations, independent journalists, and youth activists persist in their effort to promote transparency and hold authority accountable. In Northern Africa, even if they have ratified all the conventions, but when it comes to reality, it fades away. So we recommend the Northern Africa countries the following: reform restrictive laws and ensure judicial oversight, enhance protection and support the independent media and digital rights. Here I would like to mention, Honorable Chair, that we will submit the whole report to the Secretariat with each country and its detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naji. Now, I don't know if Commissioner Topsy is still online. Commissaire Topsy? She's not connected. Okay, Commissaire Derso, you can take the floor for the conclusive remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of Commissioner Topsy Sono, I would like to extend our appreciation to each and every one of you who took the floor, intervening on the intersession report of the Special Rapporteur. We take note of the intervention from the Embassy of Sahara Arab Democratic Republic, Ambassador Mohammed, on the incidents that you have highlighted in your intervention in relation to freedom of expression and access to information. We also recognize with appreciation the information provided by Mauritania on the steps that are being taken to expand the conditions for advancing freedom of expression and access to information. We take note of the interventions from the various organizations, particularly ICJ, Center for Reproductive Rights. Clearly, as indicated in the Special Rapporteur's report, freedom of expression is necessary on and of itself, but it is also a precondition for realizing other rights, such as reproductive rights. I think this has come out clearly in the intervention. We take note of the intervention from RSF regarding the situation in Burundi, and of course this speaks to the urgent letter of appeal that the Special Rapporteur made reference to in the activity report itself. We take note of the intervention from the Tunisian League for Human Rights Defense and from the Africa Center regarding incidents and issues in North Africa. So the points that you all have raised have been recorded by the Secretariat and by the Special Rapporteur and will be taken forward. Thank you very much again. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Derso. They deserve a round of applause, Commissioner Derso and Commissioner Topsy Sono, so that we can move to another topic to close this afternoon business day. Now we are going to consider item 3, continued, human rights situation in Africa. I will call some member state, human rights institution and non-governmental organizations. But before we start, I would like to give the floor to the delegation of Angola in the context of right to reply. Your Excellency Antonia Simão da Cruz Yaba, Secretary of State, you requested the floor on this item, and I want to give you the floor for 7 minutes maximum, Excellency. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your attention. I will speak in Portuguese. Honorável Presidente,
ladies and gentlemen, with your indulgence, we would like to respond to the questions that we posed regarding the allegations presented by the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations and the ASOG organization. We would like to respond the following. The implementation of projects and activities of NGOs face no impediment in terms of the freedom of association. A few associations were identified that within their activities facilitate money laundering and financing of terrorism. Currently, the action of NGOs is ruled under the terms of Presidential Decree 214/24 of 18 October, which establishes the Institute to oversee and follow the activities of all NGOs operating in the country. Regarding the right to demonstration, this is constitutionally allowed under the terms of Article 47 of our Constitution. The supposed restriction of civic space to the movement of students of Angola, MEA, it's not truthful. As an example, on the same date, 26 April 2025, over 2,000 women conducted a march in favor of peace without having any sort of impediment or constraint in exercising their right. The demonstration of the movement of Angolan students registered a few acts of vandalism to public infrastructure, which were contravening the law, which merit the intervention of Angolan authorities. In order to preserve the investment and protect public infrastructures, the law 13/24 of 29 August was approved against crimes of vandalism and public service, for which the supposed allegation that in Angola there are laws that restrict civic space are not truthful. As an example, in 2024, acts of vandalism caused loss in public service in water and electricity, esteemed in over 8 billion kwanzas, Angolan kwanza, corresponding to 83 million US dollars. This expense imputed on the state. Bearing in mind the separation of powers, sovereign powers, the competent court examined the case and led to the release of detained on April 28, which means that public institutions operate within the law. The National Police of Angola works in accordance with the Constitution and the ordinary laws aligned to the African Charter and the basic principles on the use of force and firearms of the United Nations. Excellencies, the Angolan state continues committed with the promotion and protection of human rights in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you.
On a pris bonne note de votre droit à la réponse. Et nous allons prendre cette note pour garder tous ces éléments que vous venez de nous présenter tout à l'heure pour exploitation.
We'll make use of it. Thank you. Now I'll move on to NHRIs. NHRI Burundi, we called sister yesterday, but she was not around. Algerian National Human Rights Council, Algeria. Benin Human Rights Commission, Jabonsej, Agbojan, Jabonsej. You have the floor. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair, Honorable Commissioner. Established by the law 2012-16 in February 2016, then amended by law number 24 of 26 July 2024, the Benin Human Rights Commission, the National Human Rights Institution, as our law states, is subject to the Constitution and the law. Since the 18th of March 2022, the Commission has attained the level of World Alliance of Human Rights, and on the 8th of December, got the affiliate status to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It also, since November 2022, had its affiliation before the African Commission, African Commission on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The reform which took place in 2024 in the Commission shows the vitality of the institution and the will of the state to deal with some recommendations from international instruments to enable the Benin Human Rights Institution to better achieve its mandate of promoting and protecting human rights and preventing torture. So, based on its powers, the Commission follows on a daily basis the concerns relating to the achievement of human rights in Benin. Without doubt, a lot of progress has been made by Benin in terms of implementation of country prerogatives, but the Commission, however, notes that a lot still remains to be done, challenges in regard to public liberties. As regards positive aspects, the Commission notes with satisfaction the legal framework and the regulatory framework for the promotion and protection of the rights of women, children, and disabled persons. We may quote inter alia the trilogy of laws in 2021 to lay down conditions for repression and the protection of women in Benin, as well as the law to amend prerogatives of sexual rights and the law to amend the family code. A lot of social programs and other programs to improve on the lives of people and to maintain children in school have been taken through many legislative laws, notably the efforts made in regard to economic, social, and cultural rights. It is important to note that in spite of the security challenges, terrorist attacks, which Benin is also exposed to in the northern part of the country, in addition to commercial uncertainties, the GDP of Benin was 6.4%, 6.24 as opposed to 6.4 in 2024. The Commission notes that the issue of unemployment among the youth is rampant, and there's a need for greater effort to be done so that the youth could be employed. The Commission will want to recall that many youth have been found in prison, and most of them are arrested as a result of drug trafficking and IT crimes. Very worrisome is the situation of the youth who are in prison. The Commission wonders about the future of this youth once they come out of prison, if there's no training program for them to be reinserted into the society after their prison term. The Commission calls on the government to maintain sensitization and to gear efforts in favor of this youth, so that they do not go back to crime or become public danger when they come out of prison. The independence of justice and fundamental liberties should be strengthened. For instance, press freedom and demonstrations. As a matter of fact, some reforms which carried out since 2016 have not been accepted by all, because some observers may have contributed to the thinning of the public space, and the electoral code and penal code respect individual liberty. So several recommendations have been made by the Commission, and they continue to dialogue with the state of Benin to ensure that this challenge is met. The Commission remains preoccupied by some extrajudicial or arbitrary killings which are documented in this report. The country has been called upon to conduct appropriate investigations so that those who are responsible should be brought to justice and there should be due compensation. So these are cases of human rights violations. Women and vulnerable persons are indeed most of the victims. They are discriminated against. There's violence against women, and the Human Rights Commission of Benin, as a key stakeholder in this area, works permanently to ensure gender equality and to stop violence, gender-based violence. And because in Benin, there's no law criminalizing homosexuality. So with regard to economic and social and cultural rights, the Commission calls on the state of Benin to work further to attain an equilibrium with regard to public liberties. Thank you. We've been calling them since yesterday or even the day before yesterday. South African Human Rights Commission, you have the floor. Chris Nelson.
J'appelle maintenant les non-governmental organizations, les NGOs. Forum.
ACHPR together against the death penalty. Mulai Yaskufa, are you present? Sustainable Development Institute. Environment, Natural Resources and Development. Richard Badosa, are you present? Richard Badosa. Ivorian Coalition for the Defense of Human Rights, Martha Coulibaly.
Honourable Chair and Commissioners, I stand on existing protocol. The Centre for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, congratulates the Commission and its Secretariat for successfully convening this 83rd Ordinary Session. Honourable Chair and Commissioners, the Centre is still very concerned with the conflicts which continue unabated in several parts of Africa and their heightened impact on human rights. We urge the Commission to continue spotlighting the plight suffered by people caught in and affected in the conflict situation in Sudan, in addition to responses. The Centre strongly condemns the April attacks on civilians in IDP camps in North Darfur State, Sudan, by RSF forces in the form of coordinated ground and aerial assaults, which resulted in over 400 deaths and the displacement of thousands. The Centre calls on the protagonists of the internal armed conflict in Sudan to stop the war and embark on a path to peace, which will usher in sustainable development, allow the return of 19 million Sudanese children to school, end the internal displacement of millions of innocent civilians, cease the rape and sexual abuse of women, bring an end to the genocide in Darfur, and destruction of the environment and infrastructure. The Centre also wishes to re-echo the call made at the opening of this session by the Sahrawi Republic Ambassador to the AU for the Commission to intervene in the escalating tension in the occupied territories of Western Sahara, including undertaking the fact-finding mission, which has been in abeyance since 2013, and supporting accountability processes to redress the violations. Honourable Chair and Commissioners, over the past sessions of the ACHPR, the Centre and other organizations highlighted the issue of shrinking civic space across the continent. This phenomenon unfortunately has continued with varying degrees of restrictive laws adopted to contain and suppress CSOs and the media, including interference with funding and financial operations. Examples of this abound in countries such as Eswatini, Zimbabwe, and Uganda. The Commission needs to continue calling on these states to allow for civic space operations in order to ensure a healthy democratic environment where citizen participation is cherished and as a cornerstone of development and human rights protection. Honourable Chair and Commissioners, the Centre is also concerned with the increasing attacks against persons based on their real or imputed sexual orientation and gender identity. In February 2025 in South Africa, Imam Muhsin Hendricks, the world's first openly gay imam, was murdered in a suspected hate crime. These acts of violence regularly continue across Africa, often by both state and non-state actors. We call on the Commission to remind states of their obligations under Resolution 275 to end all acts of violence and abuse by enacting and applying appropriate laws. Honourable Chair and Commissioners, the Centre calls on the Commission to respond to the targeting, arbitrary arrests, and alleged torture of human rights defenders and opposition politicians in countries such as the Republic of Uganda and the United Republic of Tanzania. In Tanzania, we are deeply concerned by the escalating threats to democracy, political participation, electoral integrity, highlighted among others by the arrest on 3rd April 2025 of opposition leader Tundu Lissu, alongside the disqualification of the Chadema party from the 2025 general elections. These developments signal a disturbing regression in political freedoms and democratic governance. The Centre urges the Commission to engage urgently with the Tanzanian authorities to prevent further democratic backsliding and to safeguard electoral legitimacy. In Uganda, opposition politician retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye remains in incarceration together with his aide, Obied Lutale, with whom he was abducted from neighboring Kenya on 16th November 2024 by unidentified Ugandan armed security operatives who held them incommunicado for 4 days before being arraigned and charged in a Kampala military court. In Zimbabwe, the Centre is concerned about the arbitrary arrests and persecution of human rights defenders, including Namatai Kwekweza Rabsinchere and journalist Blessed Mahlanga. We call upon the Zimbabwe and Ugandan authorities to allow politicians, lawyers, journalists, and human rights defenders to do their work without political persecution and reprisals. Honourable Chair and Commissioners, finally, we would like to highlight the need for interventions by states under Article 16 of the African Charter, In light of the reduction of PEPFAR, it is estimated that within the next 5 years, there may be between 4 to 10 million new HIV infections and 0.77 to 2.9 million HIV-related deaths. This global statistic disproportionately affects sub-Saharan Africa and key populations. The Centre urges the Commission to engage with states in prioritizing the creation and maintenance of national HIV prevention, testing, and treatment programs. The Centre takes this opportunity to reiterate our lasting commitment to work with and support the mandate of the Commission and to avail our capacities and resources to enhance the capacity of the work of the Commission as far as possible. On behalf of the Centre for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, I thank you again for this opportunity and wish you fruitful deliberations for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much, Madam Chanel van der Linde. The speech was very high, reading very quickly, but there is no problem. We have taken note of all your concerns. We are half an hour ahead the end of the business day. There is no NGO on my list, so it seems to me that we are going to stop the session here today, and we will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. I will ask to all the participants to be on time, because tomorrow it will be a huge day. So I want to thank all the commissioners, the members of the delegation of member states, NHRIs, civil society organizations, and if God help us, let us meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you very much. The session is suspended until tomorrow. Mais tout le reste, c'est ça, je vais le laisser ici. Hein. Tu peux prendre tout ça.